Asador Velthara stepped off her small ship and onto the human space station. Her legs shook as she walked through the metal corridors. The station was huge, much bigger than anything her people had ever built. Everything looked clean and organized, but something felt different here. The air itself seemed to carry a sense of power. She had never seen humans before. The stories her people told made them sound weak and primitive, but as she walked deeper into the station, she saw things that made her wonder. The walls were thick, built like they expected trouble. The humans she passed moved with purpose, their eyes alert and watchful. Captain Kim Taeho was waiting for her in a small white room. He was shorter than she expected, with black hair and dark brown eyes that seemed to see everything. When he looked at her, she felt like he was reading her thoughts. His uniform was simple but neat, with small metal badges she didn't understand. Next to him sat Commander Park Ji-woo, a woman with serious eyes who was writing on a flat device. She looked up when Velthara entered, then went back to her notes. Both humans stood when she came in, which surprised her. The hegemony soldiers never showed respect to anyone. Velthara's hands were shaking as she put her datapad on the table. Her blue scales caught the light, making tiny rainbow patterns on the white surface. She had practiced this speech for days during her long journey to Earth, but now the words felt stuck in her throat. "Please," she began, her voice coming out as strange electronic sounds through the translation device. "My people are dying. The hegemony came to our worlds 3 months ago. They said we had to join them or be destroyed." She touched the datapad, and holographic images appeared in the air above the table. The first image showed her home world, Zephyr Prime, as it used to be. Beautiful crystal cities rose from purple grasslands. Flying creatures moved between tall towers, where her people lived and worked in peace. The next image made her want to cry. The same city was now broken and burning. Black smoke rose from the crystal towers. The grasslands were brown and dead. She could almost hear the screams of her people through the image. "They gave us 1 day to decide," she continued, her voice getting stronger. "When our leaders said we needed time to think, they started bombing our cities. Not the military bases first, but the schools and hospitals. They wanted us to know what would happen if we said no." Captain Kim leaned forward slightly. His face didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Commander Park stopped writing and looked up at the images floating above the table. Velthara changed to the next image. Thousands of her people stood in long lines, their hands tied behind their backs. Hegemony soldiers in black armor pushed them toward large ships. Some of the prisoners were just children, their small forms barely visible in the crowd. 12 worlds, she whispered, gone. Our entire fleet fought them for 2 weeks. We had good ships, brave pilots, but the hegemony had so many more. They didn't just defeat us, they crushed us completely, made sure we could never fight back. She showed them more images. Slave camps where her people worked in dangerous mines. Factories where Zephyrian children made weapons for their captors. Cities where her culture was being erased, where speaking their native language was punished. "The survivors told us about humans," she said, looking directly at Kim. "They said your people had something different, not just weapons or ships, but something else. A way of fighting that scared even the hegemony soldiers." Kim and Park exchanged a quick look. It lasted only a second, but Velthara saw something pass between them, an understanding, maybe even anger. "We don't have much left," she continued. "A few ships, maybe 50,000 survivors hiding in the outer systems. We know we're asking a lot from strangers. Any help would mean everything. Medical supplies for our wounded, food for our children, maybe a safe place where some of our people could live." She paused, looking down at her hands. "We heard that humans understand what it means to protect family. The hegemony is coming for the rest of us soon. Without help, the Zephyrian people will be extinct in 6 months." The room went quiet. Kim stared at the floating images, his jaw muscles tightening. Park had gripped her writing tool so hard it cracked in her hand, but she didn't seem to notice. "Ambassador," Kim said finally, his voice calm, but somehow dangerous. "These images, ... are they recent?" 3 days old, Velthera replied. "The hegemony broadcasts them to break our spirit. They want us to give up hope." Kim stood up slowly. "We'll need to discuss this with our leadership. Can you stay here for 48 hours? We'll make sure you have everything you need." Velthara nodded quickly. "Yes, of course. Thank you for listening." As the humans prepared to leave, she didn't notice the way Kim's hands had formed fists at his sides. She didn't see the cold fire that had appeared in Park's eyes. She was too focused on the small spark of hope growing in her chest. The Zephyr ambassador had come asking for charity. She had no idea she had just declared war. Admiral Lee Dong-wook walked into the biggest meeting room on Earth. The United Earth Council chamber was enormous, with curved walls that reached up toward a glass dome showing the stars above. 200 representatives from every human nation and colony sat in their seats, waiting to hear what he had to say. Lee had been in the military for 30 years. He had seen wars, fought pirates, and protected human colonies from raiders, but nothing had prepared him for what he was about to show these people. The evidence from the Zephyrian ambassador was worse than anything humans had ever documented. He pressed a button, and the lights dimmed. Giant screens around the room came to life, showing the images Velthera had brought. The first few pictures made people shift uncomfortably in their seats. Children in chains, families being torn apart, cities reduced to ash and rubble. "This is what the hegemony does," Lee said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber. "They don't just conquer worlds, they break them. They take everything that makes a civilization special and destroy it completely." The next set of images showed the slave camps. Thousands of blue-scaled Zephyrians working in dangerous mines, their bodies thin from hunger. Guards in black armor stood over them with energy weapons. Some prisoners had fallen and couldn't get up. The guards just left them there. Council President Yoon So-young, a woman in her 60s, with gray hair and kind eyes, watched the screens with growing horror. She had led Earth through peaceful times, focusing on exploration and trade. This was different. This was evil in its purest form. "How many worlds have they taken?" asked Representative Kim Jae-sung from the Mars colonies. 12 so far, Lee replied, "but they're not stopping. Intelligence suggests they're planning to hit 15 more systems in the next 6 months. Peaceful species who have no way to defend themselves." The screens changed again. This time they showed hegemony propaganda broadcasts. Alien soldiers laughing as they destroyed cultural monuments. Libraries burning while ancient books turned to ash. Art galleries being stripped bare, their contents sold as trophies. "They don't just want resources," Lee continued. "They want to erase these people completely. Make it like they never existed at all." The chamber erupted in angry voices. Representatives stood up, shouting questions and demands. Lee waited for them to quiet down before speaking again. "The Zephyrian ambassador came to us asking for help. She expects maybe a few cargo ships full of medical supplies. Maybe a place where some refugees can hide until this is over." He paused, looking around the room at faces filled with rage and determination. "Ladies and gentlemen, I don't think a few supply ships are going to solve this problem." President Yoon leaned forward in her chair. "Admiral, what are you recommending?" Lee straightened his shoulders. "Total mobilization. Every ship, every soldier, every resource we have. Not to conquer territory or gain power, but to end this threat completely." The chamber went completely silent. Total mobilization meant changing everything about how human society worked. It meant turning peaceful colonies into military bases. It meant asking millions of people to leave their normal lives and prepare for war. "The hegemony has been doing this for decades," Lee explained. "They find peaceful civilizations, destroy them, and move on to the next target. They think might makes right. They believe the strong should prey on the weak. He clicked to the final image. It showed a hegemony officer standing over a group of Zephyrian children, his weapon pointed at them while their parents watched helplessly. This ends now, Lee said quietly. Not tomorrow, not next year, now. The vote was called immediately. One by one, representatives from every human world and colony stood up. Each vote was the same. Yes, 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 200 votes, all the same. Humanity had decided. 2 days later, Valthera sat in the same white room where she had first met Captain Kim. But this time, she wasn't alone with just Kim and Commander Park. A new human had joined them, a tall man with silver hair and a uniform, covered in medals she didn't recognize. Ambassador, Kim said, his voice different than before, more formal, but also warmer. I'd like you to meet General Han Minseok. He'll be coordinating our response to your situation. Valthera looked confused. She had expected maybe a small trade agreement or a promise of supplies. Response. Humanity has accepted your request for assistance, Kim continued. We've decided to provide a comprehensive solution to your hegemony problem. The word comprehensive came through her translator in a way that made it sound bigger than she expected. More complete, more final. That's wonderful, she said, hope filling her voice. How many supply ships can you send? Even 2 or 3 would help us survive until we can find somewhere else to hide. General Han leaned back in his chair. His eyes were the kind that had seen many battles, but there was something else there too, something that looked like justice. Ambassador, he said with a slight smile that wasn't entirely friendly, you misunderstand. We're not sending supply ships. Valthara's heart sank. Had the humans decided not to help after all? Or sending warships? Han continued. All of them. The translator made strange sounds as it tried to process the word, all. Valthara stared at the 3 humans, not understanding what she was hearing. All of them, she repeated. Kim nodded slowly. Every ship humanity has, every soldier we can field, every weapon we can build. The hegemony wanted to play a game where the strong crush the weak. They're about to learn that they picked the wrong species to threaten. Valthera felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Not just hope, but something bigger. Something that felt like thunder before a storm. She still didn't understand what she had started. The change started on Luna Base, humanity's oldest off-world colony. Factory manager Cho Minho was drinking his morning coffee when the emergency broadcast came through every screen in the facility. President Yoon's face appeared, her expression serious but determined. Citizens of humanity, she began, we have a choice to make. We can watch innocent people suffer, or we can do something about it. By lunchtime, Cho's mining equipment factory had shut down its normal production. Workers were already pulling blueprints for military hardware, their faces set with purpose. The massive machines that once built colony diggers would now build weapons and armor. Nobody complained. Nobody asked for overtime pay. They just worked. The same scene played out across the galaxy. On New Sol, a farming world that fed 12 other colonies, Director Park Soo-jin received new orders. Instead of sending food to civilian markets, everything would go to military supply lines. Farmers worked through the night, harvesting crops early and processing them for long-term storage. How much can we produce? Asked her assistant, looking worried about the massive quota requests flooding their systems. More than they're asking for, Park replied simply. Whatever our soldiers need, they get first. 3 asteroid mining stations in the Kepler system stopped digging for rare metals used in electronics. Instead, they focused on iron, titanium, and uranium, raw materials for warships. The miners worked double shifts without being asked. When their supervisors tried to enforce normal work schedules, the miners just ignored them and kept digging. On Earth itself, every major shipyard received the same message. Stop building everything else, and start building warships. The massive orbital construction platforms that usually made peaceful cargo vessels and exploration. Ships began assembling something very different. Long, angular shapes with thick armor and weapon ports. Engineer Yu Jaemin had spent his career building passenger ships that carried families to new colonies. Now he stood, looking at blueprints for a dreadnought, a warship bigger than anything humanity had ever built before. "Sir?" his assistant asked nervously. "Do we even know how to build something like this?" Yu smiled grimly. "We're about to learn. Fast." Within a week, the first ships were ready. They weren't pretty or fancy, but they were functional and deadly. More importantly, they were ready now. Not in 6 months, when it might be too late. Colonel Choi Hyjin led the first human fleet to enter Zephyrian space. Her task force consisted of 20 ships and 5,000 soldiers. It wasn't much compared to the massive hegemony fleets, but it was a start. When they arrived at the hidden Zephyrian refugee camp in the Tau Ceti system, something unexpected happened. Instead of setting up military bases focused on offense, the humans immediately began building defensive positions. They didn't act like conquerors. They acted like protectors. Zephyrian engineer Kethelin watched human soldiers digging trenches alongside his people. The humans worked without complaint, even though this wasn't their world or their fight. When he offered to show them where to build, they listened carefully and asked good questions. "Why are you doing this?" he asked Colonel Choi through a translator. She paused in her work, dirt covering her uniform, and looked at him with steady eyes. "Because it's right." Meanwhile, far from the refugee camps, Captain Nam Jae-hyun commanded the dreadnought Incheon, humanity's newest and most powerful warship. The bridge was quiet, except for the soft humming of computers and the occasional beep of incoming data. Lieutenant Seo Min-young, his communications officer, was listening to intercepted hegemony transmissions. Her job was to track enemy fleet movements and gather intelligence. What she heard made her angry. "Captain," she reported, "I'm picking up hegemony command chatter. They're talking about us." Nam turned in his command chair. "What are they saying?" "They think we're a joke, sir. One commander called us another pathetic species pretending to be warriors. They're betting on how long it will take to crush us completely." Nam's jaw tightened. Around the bridge, other officers stopped what they were doing to listen. The insults continued through the speakers. The hegemony soldiers were laughing, making jokes about how easily they would defeat the humans. "Sir," asked Tactical Officer Kimbora, "should we respond to their transmissions?" Nam stared at the tactical display, showing hegemony fleet positions. Red dots representing enemy ships, far outnumbering the small blue dots that showed human forces. "No," he said quietly. "Let them laugh. Let them think we're weak and stupid. When the time comes, we'll show them exactly what humans are capable of across human space." Admiral Kwon Sung-ho coordinated the largest military mobilization in galactic history from his command center on Mars. Thousands of screens showed ship construction, progress, supply line status, and troop movements. It was chaos, but organized chaos. His aide, Commander Lee Vajan, brought him the latest reports. "Sir, the numbers are incredible. In 3 weeks, we've built more warships than most civilizations build in 10 years. Food production is up 300%. Ammunition factories are running at maximum capacity." Kwon nodded, but his expression remained serious. "It's not enough yet. The hegemony has been doing this for decades. They have thousands of ships and millions of soldiers. But Sir Lee pointed out, we have something they don't." "What's that?" Lee looked at the screens showing human colonies across the galaxy. On every world, people were working together with a single purpose. Farmers, miners, factory workers, engineers, soldiers, all focused on the same goal. "We know why we're fighting," she said simply. Kwon understood. The hegemony fought for conquest and power. They destroyed civilizations because they could, but humanity was fighting for something different. They were fighting for the simple idea that innocent people shouldn't suffer just because someone stronger decided to hurt them. It was an old human concept, one that had driven them through countless struggles throughout their history. The idea that might doesn't make right, that the strong have a responsibility to protect the weak, not prey on them. The hegemony was about to learn that this idea, when backed by human determination and industrial capacity, was more dangerous than any weapon. The mobilization continued. Ships launched every day. Soldiers trained around the clock. Engineers worked miracles of improvisation and speed. And somewhere in the dark between the stars, hegemony commanders continued to laugh at the species that thought it could challenge an empire. They wouldn't be laughing much longer. Fleet Commander Vexkar of the hegemony's 7th Fleet was in a good mood as his ships dropped out of hyperspace. The Kepler 442 system was supposed to be another easy target, just like the dozens of worlds they had conquered before. His intelligence reports said a few primitive human ships might be in the area, but nothing worth worrying about. Scan the system, he ordered from his command throne. Find their ships and prepare to destroy them. His sensor officer's voice came back confused. Sir, you need to see this. On the main screen, the system appeared exactly as expected, except for one small detail. 27 human warships hung in perfect formation near the 4th planet, not hiding or running, but waiting. Their ships were smaller than hegemony vessels, but something about the way they positioned themselves made Vexkar uncomfortable. 20 ships against our 90, he laughed, trying to shake off his unease. They must be insane. Aboard the human flagship Seoul, Admiral Kim Young-hee stood calmly on her bridge. She had fought pirates and raiders before, but this was different. This was war against an enemy that enslaved children and destroyed entire cultures for profit. Admiral, her tactical officer reported, hegemony fleet is moving into attack formation. They're not even trying to negotiate. Kim nodded. She hadn't expected them to. The hegemony didn't negotiate with species they considered inferior. Open channel to all ships, she commanded. When the communication links activated, she spoke to every human captain and crew member in the battle group. All ships, remember what we're fighting for. Not glory, not conquest, but justice. Those monsters have hurt innocent people for the last time. Today, we show them what happens when you threaten humanity's friends. The first hegemony salvo came in hard, energy beams and missiles racing across space. But the human ships moved like they were dancing, each vessel covering another, their defensive fire perfectly coordinated. Years of training exercises and war games had prepared them for this moment. Human return fire was different from anything the hegemony had seen. Instead of random shooting, every shot was calculated for maximum effect. Human captains didn't waste ammunition on flashy displays. They aimed for engines, weapons, and command centers. The battle lasted 6 hours. For the first 3 hours, it looked like the hegemony might win through sheer numbers. Their ships were bigger, and their weapons more powerful. But human crews kept fighting with a determination that surprised everyone, including themselves. Commander Park Hyun-woo's destroyer took heavy damage in the 2nd hour, his engines failing, and his hull breached in 12 places. His crew worked miracles to keep fighting, patching holes with emergency foam while returning fire at the same time. Sir, his engineering officer reported, we've lost main power. Weapons are on backup energy only. Then we make every shot count, Park replied calmly. His next missile strike took out a hegemony cruiser's bridge, sending the enemy ship spinning helplessly into space. By the 4th hour, something strange was happening. The humans weren't just fighting defensively anymore. They were hunting. Small groups of human ships worked together to isolate single hegemony vessels, overwhelming them with coordinated attacks. Vexcar watched his fleet falling apart and couldn't understand how. His ships were superior in every technical specification, but these humans fought like they had nothing to lose and everything to gain. All ships retreat, he finally ordered, his confidence shattered. Fall back to the jump point. But when his surviving ships tried to escape, they found more human vessels waiting for them. Admiral Kim had positioned reserve forces at every possible exit route. The hegemony fleet was trapped. When the battle ended, debris from 63 hegemony ships drifted through space. Only 7 human ships were lost, and those crews were remembered as heroes. The remaining human fleet didn't celebrate or rest. They immediately jumped to the next system, where hegemony forces were holding Zephyrian prisoners. Major Jung Borum led the first human ground assault on a hegemony prison camp. Her marines moved through the facility like ghosts, their training and equipment far superior to anything the hegemony expected from a primitive species. The prison guards never had a chance. Human soldiers had studied hegemony tactics for weeks, learning their weaknesses and blind spots. More importantly, they were fighting to free innocent people, while the guards were just following orders they didn't really believe in. Sector 7 clear, reported Sergeant Ko Minjin over his radio. 43 prisoners freed, all guards neutralized. Jung watched her soldiers help wounded Zephyrians to safety. These weren't hardened warriors seeking glory. They were ordinary people who had volunteered to fight because children were suffering. "Ma'am," one of her corporals asked, "what do we do with the prison commander?" Jung looked at the hegemony officer, who was begging for mercy in broken galactic standard. "Process him according to military law. No torture, no revenge. We're not like them." Meanwhile, on the intelligence ship, Busan Captain Oh Hae-won was making a discovery that would change everything. His communications team had been monitoring hegemony transmissions, trying to locate their next targets. Instead, they found something much more valuable. "Captain," Lieutenant Beak, Dudgeon called excitedly, "you need to see this. We've cracked their main communication network." The screens filled with data, star charts showing every hegemony base, supply depot, and occupied world, prisoner counts for each facility, guard rotations, supply schedules, fleet positions. Everything. O stared at the information, understanding what it meant. "They keep detailed records of everything." "Yes, sir. Every crime, every atrocity, every stolen world. It's all here." O's expression grew cold. Most militaries would use this information to win battles, but humans were thinking bigger than that. "Send this to Admiral Kwan immediately," he ordered. "All of it." Within hours, every human fleet commander had complete intelligence on hegemony operations. They didn't just know where to attack next. They knew where to attack everything. The hegemony tried to regroup, pulling their scattered fleets back to defend their core worlds. But they discovered something terrifying. Human ships were already there, waiting for them. Admiral Song Ji-won's task force had jumped directly to the hegemony's main supply hub, cutting off resources to 17 occupied systems. Captain Yoon, Song-ho's raiders were hitting ammunition depots faster than they could be rebuilt. Commander Lim Soo-jin's marines were liberating prison camps that the hegemony had forgotten they even had. Hegemony fleet. Admiral Zarthok finally understood what was happening. These humans weren't trying to win battles. They were systematically destroying his entire empire, piece by piece. "How many fleets do they have?" he demanded from his command bunker. "Unknown, sir. They seem to be everywhere at once." What Zarthok didn't understand was that humans had asked themselves a simple question. What would it take to make sure this never happens again? The answer was complete victory. Not just defeating the hegemony's military, but dismantling their entire ability to hurt innocent people ever again. Humanity had gone to war not for conquest, but for justice. And they would not stop until every prison was empty and every slave was free. The storm had broken, and it would not end until the darkness was completely swept away. Ambassador Valthera walked slowly through the corridors of what used to be the hegemony's most powerful military station. 6 months ago, this place had been the center of an empire that controlled 47 star systems and enslaved millions of beings. Today, it was Outpost Liberty, a human naval base that protected freed worlds across 3 sectors of space. The changes were everywhere. Where once dark metal walls had displayed propaganda about hegemony superiority, now warm lighting, illuminated artwork created by liberated species. The prison cells had been converted into medical bays and refugee processing centers. The torture chambers were now schools where rescued children learned to read and write in their native languages again. Admiral Park Chan-woo met her in the main corridor, his uniform clean but showing signs of the long campaign. Unlike the hegemony officers who used to run this station, Park walked among the freed prisoners without fear. Children from a dozen different species would run up to him, and he always had time to listen to their questions. "Ambassador," he greeted her warmly. "How are our Zephyrian refugees settling in?" "Better than we ever hoped," she replied, her voice filled with wonder. "Your people don't just give us food and shelter. You're helping us rebuild our culture, our language, our history, things we thought were lost forever." They walked together toward the observation deck, passing groups of human soldiers working alongside former slaves. The humans weren't acting like conquerors or occupiers. They were teachers, doctors, engineers, and counselors. People who had volunteered to stay and help rebuild what the hegemony had destroyed. The observation deck had once been where hegemony commanders watched their fleets depart for new conquests. Now it offered a view of something very different. Human patrol ships moved in careful formations, escorting transport vessels full of liberated beings back to their home worlds. "Commander," Li Jihai found them there, holding a data pad that contained the final reports from the liberation campaign. She was young for her rank, promoted quickly during the 6-month war, but her eyes held the weight of everything she had seen. "Admiral, Ambassador," she said, saluting crisply. "I have the final numbers from Operation Clean Sweep." Li consulted her datapad, reading statistics that represented millions of lives changed forever. The last hegemony stronghold surrendered this morning at 0347 Standard Time. Fortress Malevolence in the Outer Rim, their final military installation. Valthara listened, still struggling to believe what she was hearing. Surrendered. They actually gave up. "Yes, ma'am." The garrison commander sent an unconditional surrender. They had no ships left, no supplies, and no reinforcements coming. Captain Kim Dong-chun's task force accepted their surrender and began processing the prisoners. "How many?" Park asked quietly. 2,300 former hegemony soldiers. "Sir, all will be tried for war crimes according to Galactic Convention standards. But more importantly, we found another 800 enslaved beings in the fortress. They're being treated and will be repatriated to their home worlds within the week." Lee turned to the next page. Final totals for the entire campaign. 473 hegemony installations destroyed or captured. 3.7 million enslaved beings liberated. 216 worlds freed from occupation. The numbers were staggering, but Valthara found herself focusing on something else. What happened to the hegemony leadership? Park's expression grew cold. The ones who survived the war are awaiting trial. The ones who chose to fight to the end, didn't survive. And their empire, gone, Lee said simply. Completely dismantled. Every slave camp, every fortress, every supply depot. We didn't just defeat them, we erased their ability to ever hurt anyone again. Valthara moved to the large viewport, watching a convoy of ships preparing to depart. These vessels carried families reunited after years of separation, children who would grow up free, and entire cultures that could now rebuild their civilizations. "I don't understand," she said softly. We came to you asking for help with our problem. Some medical supplies, maybe a safe place to hide. You could have given us that and been done with it." She turned to face the two humans, her blue scales reflecting the light from the stars outside. "Instead, you eliminated the problem entirely, not just for us, but for everyone." "Why?" Commander Lee exchanged a glance with Admiral Park. It was the same question many species had been asking throughout the galaxy. Why had humanity done so much more than anyone had requested? "Ambassador," Lee said carefully, "can I ask you something? If you had the power to stop something like the hegemony, would you use it?" "Of course," Valthera replied immediately. "But we didn't have that power." "We did," Park said simply. "So we had a choice. We could help just your people and let the hegemony continue hurting others, or we could solve the problem for everyone." "But the cost," Valthara protested. "Your people spent enormous resources. Thousands of your soldiers died in the fighting. Why sacrifice so much for strangers?" Lee smiled, but there was something fierce in her expression. "Ambassador, when humans make friends, we make friends for life. The hegemony learned what happens to people who hurt our friends." Through the viewport, they watched another group of ships disappear into hyperspace, carrying more freed beings home. Each ship represented families that would be whole again, children who would grow up without fear, entire species that could rebuild their civilizations. "But it wasn't just about friendship," Park added. "We learned something about ourselves during this war. We learned that we can't stand by and watch innocent people suffer when we have the power to stop it. The galaxy is watching," Lee continued. "Every species, every government, every organization that might think about preying on the weak. They all saw what happened to the hegemony." Valthera understood. This hadn't just been about stopping one evil empire. It had been about sending a message that would echo across the galaxy for generations. "What message?" she asked. Park's voice was quiet but carried absolute certainty. "If you harm the innocent, if you prey on the weak, if you traffic in suffering, humanity will find you. And when we do, we won't just stop you, we'll erase you from existence." The three of them stood in silence, watching the peaceful flow of ships carrying hope across the stars. The hegemony was gone, but something new had taken its place. Not another empire, but an idea. The idea that might doesn't make right, that the strong should protect the weak, and that evil should never be allowed to flourish simply because good people choose to do nothing. Valthera finally understood what her desperate plea had unleashed. She had asked for charity and received justice. She had begged for help and received liberation for her entire species and dozens of others. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly what humanity had intended. From this day forward, every would-be tyrant would have to ask themselves a simple question: is this worth facing humanity's wrath? For most of them, the answer would be no. The age of unchallenged evil was over. The age of human protection had begun.